Good morning. We are proud to remind everybody that Daf Yomi Shiur is on every day, all the time. We're finishing Perek the third. Perek Shlishi is going to be finishing Emir Hashem tomorrow.
Yeah.
We may be starting the Perek the fourth tomorrow, but definitely by Tuesday. So please, if you have been considering joining your Daf Yomi, your local Daf Yomi, please make sure to let Jeff Wald know via the WhatsApp group that you are interested in the special $18 Volume 2 Kahal Yereim edition of the Masechus Zevachim. And Volume 2 is action-packed with more laws of Pigul, because we love that stuff. And we got sprinkling of blood and things, and we're inside the base of Mikdash, we're outside the base of Mikdash, we're all over the place in the Nazar. Okay. On we go. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored anonymously, right? But in the merit of all those in our community who need a shidduch, we are at the very top of Lamed Gimel Beis. Ravina Amar, when we had discussed, we had worried that we had brought a brisa about somebody who was who had tsaras, would come into the Beis HaMikdash, somebody who had tsaras and also was a keri, and came into the Beis HaMikdash, and we were wondering if going into the Beis HaMikdash, b'miktzas, putting part of your body into the Beis HaMikdash was the same thing as going all the way into the Beis HaMikdash when you're tamei. How is that not an obligation of kares? How is that not a problem? Reish Lakish had given, we had talked about the answer that once you were permitted to go in for tsaras, then you were also permitted to go in for keri, and that was that answer. Ravina says, Le'inyan Malkus Itmar. Ravina says, this statement, right, that Ula says in the name of Reish Lakish, that going into the Beis HaMikdash is like going in a little bit is as far as getting Malkus is concerned. Meaning that if you go into the Beis HaMikdash, this is Yehuda's always worried about the punishments, going into the Beis HaMikdash, stick part of your body into the Beis HaMikdash, you get Malkus, you don't get kares. That's the difference, that's the distinction. And that's his second answer, that's his answer. And Ki also Rabin Amar, Rabbi Yavo, Rabin came in, he said the name of Rabbi Yavo, Le'inyan Tamei Shenaga Bakodesh Itmar. The pasuk that we had talked about that proved that you're coming into the Beis HaMikdash is prohibited, even per part, isn't really talking about coming into the Beis HaMikdash in part. It's talking about somebody who's tamei, who touches Kodesh, not somebody who is tamei coming into the Beis HaMikdash.
But if you open the doors, even the doors to the walking in is Kodesh, isn't it?
Yeah, but he wouldn't be the one opening the doors. But the doors themselves, remember, it's the space, not the items. The doors are not the issue. It's the space inside the doors you have to worry. So it's a question of how much. If you just open doors and push them, right? I'm not sure which direction the doors of Nicanor swung, inward or outward, right? It's a good question. Okay, so now, Itmar. So he said like as follows. The Itmar, there's Shinaga Kodesh Itmar, that's what that was. The Itmar. As we have learned, right? Tamei Shinaga Kodesh. So as somebody who's tamei, who touches kodesh, who touches a korban, Reish Lakish Amar Loka. Reish Lakish says you get malchus for that. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Loka. Rabbi Yochanan says you do not get malchus for that. Reish Lakish Amar Loka. Reish Lakish says you do, because the pasuk says Bechol Kodesh Lo Siga. Do not come in contact. Do not touch anything that is kodesh. And Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan says Eino Loka. You don't get malchus because Ahu Betruma Ksiv. That pasuk is talking about truma. You're not allowed to touch. The tamei person who touches truma gets this malchus. That pasuk is not talking about touching kodesh at all. Therefore, there's no lo saseh. The only reason that you know that you're not supposed to do it is because of a positive commandment that says to keep those holy objects, those holy things holy, and you don't get malchus for a positive. So, Reish Lakish, Haikra Lahachihuda. Also, the problem is that what Reish Lakish learns this pasuk for? Hami Baile Azhara Laochel Basar Kodesh. He says that pasuk is telling me not to eat something that's kodesh while I have tumah, not touching it. De itmar, as we have learned, azhara la'ocha basar kodesh minayin. Where is the source for the prohibition of eating kodesh, eating a korban while you're tamei? Reish Lakish says, bechol kodesh lo siga, you shall not touch kodesh. And why does it say touch when it means eat? We will discuss. Rabbi Yochanan says, Tani Bardala, Bardala taught, Asya tumaso mi bias mikdash. We have a gzera shava of the word tumaso from the prohibition of coming into the Beis HaMikdash. Pasuk says, "V'hanefesh asher tochal basar mi zevach." The pasuk does not quote it, right? V'hanefesh asher tochal basar mi zevach hashlamim asher laHashem v'tumaso alav v'nichros nefesh ahim me'ameha. Right, somebody who eats meat from a zevach shlamim that is from Hashem, and his tuma is upon him. He will get kares. and then by somebody who comes into the base of Mikdash, she says, "Kol nogeh b'meis b'nefesh hadam asher yumas v'lo yischata," somebody who touches a dead body, and he has not purified himself as Mishkan Hashem Timei. He impurifies the Mishkan of Hashem, the dwelling place of Hashem, v'nichras on nefesh Yisrael, and he's going to be cut off now because he hasn't had the paraduma. Now, malahalan onosh v'his here, so too, just as, right, it says over there, going into the Beis HaMikdash, there's, right, the pasuk says that there's a punishment, and then there's a lo saseh, so afkan, so here too, it says kares, but it doesn't tell you the lo saseh. We're going to learn Gzera Shava, it's the same lo saseh. Onosh v'his here, you're going to get punished, and there's a prohibition written in the Torah. Bechol kodesh lo siga, right, he is left alone to tell me that somebody who's tamei can touch somebody who's tamei who touches kodesh also is in violation of the prohibition. Okay, so now the answer is you can learn both things from it according to Reish Lakish, because tamei shenaga ba kodesh, the pasuk that somebody who's tamei who touches kodesh mida apke rachmana b'lashon negia, even though it's talking about eating, it uses the word touch. Right, that's a weird way of describing eating. So therefore, ashar la'ochel mid itkish kodesh lemikdash, and therefore the prohibition about somebody who's going to eat it. Right, we're going to learn from the connection between kodesh to mikdash. Meaning, since the pasuk says b'chol kodesh lo sigav v'lo mikdash lo savo, you shall not touch anything kodesh, and you should not come into the Beis HaMikdash. We know that the prohibition is both coming into the mikdash and eating anything, and then the pasuk says touching, which means that all of those things, right? So it's going to be all of those things. So the pasuk is talking about eating kodesh because it's the same level of prohibition, and not talking about touching because touching is going to be a malchus, a prohibition, and eating is going to be kares, and coming into the Beis HaMikdash is also kares. Okay, so that's how we're going to learn it. Now, we're going to Tanya Kavasa the Reish Lakish. We're going to brisa that supports Reish Lakish's view as to the source for the prohibition of somebody who's tamei who eats a tahor korban. Bechol kodesh lo siga. That's our source according to Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan had learned tumaso. So this is Reish Lakish's source. Azhara laochel ata omer. You're saying that that tells me where the prohibition of touching comes in. Azhara laochel. So you're saying it's a prohibition against eating it, right? So azhara laochel o eino ella lenogea. How do you know it's going to be a prohibition for eating it rather than the prohibition for touching it? Tamad Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, "Bechol kodesh lo siga, ve'al mikdash lo savo." You're not supposed to touch it. You're not supposed to come into the mikdash. Makish kodesh lemikdash is telling us that the prohibition in this pasuk is talking about the same level of prohibition as coming into the mikdash. Ma mikdash, just like when you are tamei, you come into the Beis HaMikdash, davar sheyesh bo netilas nashama, you're going to get a punishment. Life is lost for that, i.e., you get kares for that. So af kodesh, also the korban that's listed in this pasuk, the prohibition of touching the korban that's listed in this pasuk has to be a davar sheyesh bo netilas nashama, has to be something of significant level that you would get kares for in it. That's why the two are together. So therefore, ve'i ben nogeya, if all you're doing is touching the korban, so then netilas neshama mika, there's no kares for just simply touching the korban. The pasuk never says that. The pasuk says you get kares for eating a korban when you're tamei. Ella b'achilas, therefore it's going to be eating. So therefore, the fact that we learn touching only comes from the fact that the pasuk is using the language of touching, right? But the pasuk is actually a prohibition against eating, which you get kares for. Okay, so now. Still, we have a question on Reish Lakish, right? So, because there's another drasha that he uses this pasuk for. He says, "L'tamei she'achal basar kodesh lifnei zrika." This is coming to tell me that somebody who's tamei who eats the korban before the blood is sprinkled. Right after the blood is sprinkled, we know it's a kosher korban. At that point, the pasuk says you can get kares for eating the korban. What about eating the korban? You start eating the meat before zrika, right? So you're somebody who's tamei before zrika. De itmar, as we have said in the Beis Medrash. Tamei she'achal basar kodesh lifnei zrika. So let's say somebody's tamei and he eats the meat of the korban before the korban is finished, before the zrika. Reish Lakish Amar Loke. Reish Lakish says he gets malchus for that. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Eino Loke. Rabbi Yochanan says there's no malchus for that. Reish Lakish Amar Loke. Reish Lakish says you do get malchus because it says b'chol kodesh lo siga. Don't touch any of the kodesh. Lo shna lifnei zrika v'lo shna la'achar zrika. Any kodesh. Doesn't matter whether it's before the blood is sprinkled or after the blood is sprinkled. If you're tamei, don't touch it. i.e. eat it. Right? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Eino Loka, there's no malchus for it. Why? Because Kedetani Bardala, like Bardal explained, Asya tumaso, the source is tumaso, it's the Gzera Shava. V'chikasev ahu, ahi, that pasuk is lachar zrika. That pasuk of a tameh is talking about somebody who's after the blood is already sprinkled. Therefore, the prohibition of a tameh eating kodesh only applies after zrika. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. Okay, in Cain, if that's true, lema kra, so therefore we're stuck because now we have Reish Lakish saying b'chol kodesh lo sika teaches me not to eat the korban while you're tameh before zrika. So where's the source for touching? So im Cain, so he says if that was all that it was coming to tell me, lema kra bakodesh, the pasuk would have said bakodesh, my bechol kodesh. What does it mean? All kodesh. Shma mimatarti. Therefore, we're going to say both of these things. Tameh who eats basar kodesh before zrika and after zrika. And that's where we learn the source for the prohibition. Okay, so now let's go back to this machlokas between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan of a tamei person who eats.
But why look like wouldn't it be kares the same way as it is before? We're saying no. We're saying after it's
afterwards is going to be afterwards we have, if it's afterwards we have the
because you're learning it from Gezerah Shava, you'd assume the same rules apply to both.
Well, Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish isn't learning the Gezerah Shava. Rabbi Yochanan is learning the Gezerah Shava, right? So, and he says it doesn't apply to beforehand, right? It doesn't apply to beforehand. Reish Lakish, who says that it applies to beforehand, right? It doesn't. Right? He says that it applies to beforehand. Therefore, he holds, right, that only eating kodesh afterwards is kares because. Is it the same pasuk? I think. Well, why didn't you maybe do a kares? Loka.
Omar Luka.
You get loka.
Right. He said you get 40 lashes, but he said before that you get kares.
Well, you get kares if you eat it afterwards, right? If you eat it after zrika. After zrika, you get kares. Your question is why not both? Why don't you learn kares back to both?
All right. Okay, sure. What's the question? Right. If you eat it before zrika.
Because the source for kares is a different pasuk. The source for kares is, where is that pasuk? He says because the pasuk is. That's a separate pasuk, right? That's pasuk in Vayikra Zayin that tells us what the pasuk. This is just saying there's a lo saseh. So it's the same source for lo saseh, but then the pasuk goes out of its way to tell me that you get kares for eating it while it's a shlomim after the zrika is already done. That's how I'm understanding. So the pasuk tells me only kares after you do the zrika. Before the zrika, there's still a lo saseh. Therefore, you get malchus for it. Gufa. Tamei shacha basar kodesh lifnei zrika. Okay, this is our argument. Somebody who's tamei, who eats the meat of a korban before the zrika is done. Reish Lakish Amar Loka. Reish Lakish says you get malchus. Rabbi Yochanan says Eino Loka you don't. Amar Abaye says machlokas betumas haguf. The machlokas is where the person who's doing the eating is tamei. Aval betumas basar. However, if it's the korban that is tamei, not the person, so l'divrei kol loka, everyone agrees there's malchus there. Right? Damar Kro. Why? Because the pasuk says, the whole pasuk is v'habasar sheyiga b'chol tamei. Any meat that touches something that is tamei, lo ye achel, it shall not be eaten. Ba'esh yisaref, it needs to be burnt. V'habasar kol tahor yochal basar. And the meat, anybody who's tahor can eat the meat. So the Torah says v'habasar. Now it repeats the word v'habasar and the meat. L'rabos eitzim ulevona. That comes to include even if you eat the wood or the incense, right? It's not just the meat. Why? Because the meat was already listed in the pasuk. Why is the meat listed a second time? So it's one of those im eno inyan, right? I don't have a need to write the word meat twice in the pasuk. Therefore, it must refer to eating something of the korban other than the meat. Now, you delav b'nei achilin inhu, because those are not edible. So therefore, vafilu hachi, even still, rabin hukra, the pasuk says that they're included in the prohibition. Now, something that's not edible can't become tamei. Right? So the wood can't be tamei, the lavona can't be tamei. Therefore, the prohibition of this pasuk must be a person who is tamei, who is eating an item that is kodesh. So if a person eats kodesh meat that is tahor, then a person who's tamei eats that, then he gets malchus. But this pasuk is not talking about a person who is tahor, who eats meat that is tamei. because that's not the subject of the pasuk.
The malchus he gets, does he get the malchus until he dies, or how many malchus does he get if he does this?
I'm sorry, how many malchus does he get? Same rules as we had in before when we talked about malchus, right? Always the same 39, depending on the evaluation. Okay? So, therefore, even Rabbi Yochanan is going to agree there's malchus if the person is tamei, right? The Rava disagrees with Abaye. Rava says no. Their argument between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan about this tuma before zrika is betuma saguf. That argument is when the person is tamei. Rabbi Yochanan says even when the person is tamei, you still don't get malchus. He says aval betumas basar. If the meat is tamei, divrei eno loka. Then even Reish Lakish agrees you don't get malchus. Right? My time. What's the reason? Kevin de lo karina bay vetuma so alav v'nichrasa. Because the pasuk that tells us about the punishment says that somebody who eats the meat of a zevach shlamim and his tuma is upon him, he's the one who's tamei, v'nichrasa, he gets kares. Lo karina bay. So therefore, if the pasuk tells us where's the kares, the situation of kares, that comes upon a person who is tamei, who eats kodesh, not right somebody who is tahor, not somebody who's tahor eats a korban that is tamei. So too, the pasuk which is right before it is talking about the same thing. It's talking about when the person is tamei, not when the meat is tamei. And even Reish Lakish would agree that that is the case. So now they have an argument. They're arguing about what circumstance. There's an argument between Abaye and Rava. What circumstance Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing? Are they arguing in the case where the person is tamei and he eats tahor meat, or are they only arguing in the case where, are they arguing about, or does everybody agree that in that case you get malchus, but in the case where the meat is tahor, is tamei, and the person is tahor, do they argue in that case as well? So that's the argument. Now, Gemara asks about Rava's perspective, right? Again, Rava's the one who just held that the argument, right, is when the person is tamei. But if the meat was tamei, everyone would agree there's no malchus, right? V'hamar, don't we say v'habasar l'rabos eitzim levona? The Brisa says that the word v'habasar comes to include even the wood and even the levona. Now, how could that be a circumstance, right? So how can we have a circumstance the wood can't become tamei? So we can't be talking about a circumstance where the korban is tamei, is a machlokes. That can't be. So what's going on here? The answer is no. You can actually make the wood designated as kodesh because you can put them into a service utensil. And you put them in a service utensil, they become kodesh. Right, as to a keli, and they become like a korban that you have sanctified them 100%, and therefore somebody can get malchus eating those items while you are tamei, right? So therefore, which is not the case by meat before zrika, because that's not a full-fledged korban. So therefore, they could be arguing about whether you can eat. In other words, the wood can become tamei to a level that meat before zrika is not, because it becomes full-fledged kodshim once you take the wood and put it into a service utensil, whereas the meat doesn't become full-fledged kodshim until you sprinkle the blood. Okay. Ditznan, as we learned in the Mishnah, kol sheyesh lo matirim, any korban that has matirim, has a process by which the meat becomes permitted, misha karvu matirav, once you sprinkle the blood, and now the matirim are brought, so then the meat becomes permitted to eat. Kol she'ein lo matirin, something that doesn't have anything that's going to permit its eating, misha kadosh b'kli, once you put it in a service utensil, then it becomes sanctified 100%. Because you're not going to eat it anyway. There's no matir service, so therefore that could be kodesh anyway. Okay, now, another issue that Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan argued about, itmar, since we're gathering them all together, hamale evere behema tmeya al gabe mizbeach. Okay, somebody takes a non-kosher animal, and he puts it onto the mizbeach. Reish Lakish says, loka, you get malchus for that. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, ino loka. Rabbi Yochanan says, no malchus for that. Why?
Isn't it in a bear to put a non-kosher meat on a mizbeach? Why?
So see the machlokas. right?
Not.
It's an Avera. The question is, do you get Malchus for it?
Why you should? Because you're doing a big Avera by putting some non-kosher on his bed.
So watch. So it depends on what the pasuk is. Watch the pasuk. Reish Lakish Amar. Reish Lakish says you get Malchus. Why? Because the pasuk says mina behema mina bakar mina tzon takrivas korbanchem. You're supposed to bring kosher animals, right? From an animal, from bakar or tzon, you should bring your korban. So tahora in tamea lo. That pasuk means a kosher animal, yes, not a non-kosher. Now it's a lav haba miklal aseh. Technically, though, it's a positive commandment to bring kosher animals. It's not a negative commandment not to bring non-kosher animals. Therefore, he holds lokin alav. Back in Meseches Makos, we had learned Reish Lakish holds you get Malchus for a positive commandment where you have a negative that comes from a positive. For Rabbi Yochanan Omar, ain't lokin alav. Rabbi Yochanan says you don't get Malchus for that. Lav haba miklal aseh ain't lokin alav because he holds that you don't get Malchus for a positive for violating a positive commandment. Okay, so now we ask on Reish Lakish. Meisiv, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, anything that has split hooves and chews its cud, oso tochelu. That is what you shall eat, right? And so now that's what you're supposed to eat. V'lo behema tameya. So you're not supposed to eat a non-kosher animal. V'lav haba mikol aseh aseh. And now that is a positive commandment, right?
When Mashiach comes, we're allowed to put pig on his back as we become kosher. When Mashiach comes,
I do not know. I don't know. Mashiach comes and pigs don't become kosher. But okay, if you've heard whatever's kosher, right? That's going to go on. If pigs are that is kosher, so then it's kosher, but it's not. So okay. Now, so the question on Reish Lakish is right. This says this is a positive commandment, right? And Reish Lakish says it should become a negative commandment because a positive commandment you should get Malchus for it. So Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa. So Rabbi Yaakov says from Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa, Aspera lach be'evari behema tameya dekuliyama lo pligi. Nobody's going to argue, right, that there's only a positive commandment and there's no Malchus for putting up these limbs, for putting up the parts of a non-kosher animal, because only a positive commandment not to do that. Ki pligi chaya. The argument is over a chaya, that is a non-domesticated animal. What if you have a kosher, non-domesticated animal? You bring a deer as a korban, right? So, v'hachi itmar, this is the argument. Rabbi Yochanan Omar over ba'aseh. Rabbi Yochanan says, you violated a positive commandment. Reish Lakish Omar ino over below klum. And Reish Lakish says, you have not violated anything. Right? And therefore, not a problem at all. But nobody says you get Malchus, right? There's not an argument on Malchus at all. Rabbi Yochanan Amar over Basei, Rabbi Yochanan says you violated a positive commandment because it says you should bring from the bakar minatzon, right? As korban chem. Behema in, that's a domesticated animal, yes. Chaya lo, not a non-domesticated. You can't bring a gazelle. Reish Lakish Amar, Reish Lakish says, Eino over alav bevelo klum, hahu mitzvah. There's nothing wrong. You haven't violated anything. When the Torah says you shall bring a cow or a bull or a goat or a sheep or anything like that, that's just a positive commandment. You bring a deer, you don't get the positive commandment of bringing a cow, right? So therefore, but it's not a prohibition. It's not a positive commandment that leads to a negative. So Reish Lakish is not a problem at all. Bring away. Okay. So, Meisiv Rava. Okay, now we're going to ask a question of Reish Lakish based on that explanation. Rava asks, okay, about the prohibition against, Rava says here, in this brisa that talks about the prohibition against bringing a chaya, a non-domesticated animal. Ilu nemar korban laHashem behema, if the pasuk had said that the sacrifice to Hashem will be a domesticated animal, so then, and it did not explain that it meant a bakar and its own, right, which was the explanation of what a behema is. Hayisi omer chaya b'chal behema. I would have thought that a chaya is included in a behema. Behema is the general word for kosher animals, and so therefore a chaya would be included. Be'inyan shenamar, for example, it says zosa behema asher tochlu. These are the behemos that you shall eat. Shor sek kisavim v'seizim ayil utzvi, and then the pasuk gives examples, right? An ox, a sheep, a goat, all the examples, or a ram, or a deer, and it includes in behemos, right? So Talmud Lomar, therefore, in this pasuk, it tells me it's not the case because it says bakar vatzon, right? It says here, behema could be chaya, but the pasuk then specifies bakar v'tzon. Bakar v'tzon amarti lecha v'lo chaya. Only a bakar and a tzon can be brought as a korban, not a chaya. Yachol lo yavi might be that you're not allowed to bring it v'imhevi kosher, but if you do, it's still kosher korban. Ha lema zed dome. So what is this compared to? L'tamid shamalil rabo. It's like a student. Imagine his teacher says to him, haveli chitim, go and bring me some wheat. Maybe lo chitim usorim, and the student brings him wheat and barley. If he hasn't disobeyed what he was told to do, he's giving more. Nothing wrong with that. So therefore, you might think that's what's going on. Hashem says, bring me cows, bring me bulls, and you decide, okay, I'll bring a deer also. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that because you did not bring the cows and the goats. So you might think it's kosher. Tam and Lomer, therefore the pasuk says, bakar vatzon, it has to be from bakar and tzon. Bakar vatzon amarti lecha v'lo chaya. I told you, bring me bakar and tzon, not a chaya. What is this therefore like? It's like a student whose teacher told him, don't bring me anything except wheat. Now the student brings wheat and barley. Now he's not adding, right? Now he's disobeying. So pasul, so therefore the korban is pasul. Tiyufta the Reish Lakish, so that refutes Reish Lakish. Tiyufta and Reish Lakish is not correct. That in fact bringing a chaya is not allowed. Okay. Next, Mishnah says.
So he would hold it's Malchus. And we hold it's Malchus.
It's an assay. It's only it's an assay, so it's not Malchus.
Okay.
Right? So in the end, it's not Malchus. Even according to Reish Lakish. Okay. V'chulan shekiblu, right? So all of these people that if they accept, if all of these inappropriate people accept the blood of a korban with the intent for pigul, it's not going to invalidate the korban, right? Because they are invalid, and so therefore, what do? You go back and you catch the blood again with a real kohen, and then you are fine, good to go. So, Reish Lakish asks Rabbi Yochanan the question: Pasul ma'u sheyaseh shirayim. Okay, so let's say somebody who's pasul, a person who's not supposed to be doing the korban, he catches the blood, he brings it to his beach, and he sprinkles the blood. What is the halacha about the leftover blood in his utensil? Okay, we understand the zrika is not valid, right? But is the blood left over, is it considered to be what's called shirayim? Shirayim blood is once I've got the blood in that utensil and I take part of it and I sprinkle it on his back, the rest gets poured out into the base. There's a little, let's see if they have a picture of it here. They have
like
a drain in the base of the mizbeach. I don't have good pictures here. A drain in the base of the mizbeach. And they would pour it out over there. So okay, then I have a picture here. We'll try to bring pictures. So, does the leftovers of what he brought become shirayim? Become the leftovers that need to be poured in the base? So Amar Le, ein. So he said, ein osa shirayim. It doesn't. Ella chutz lizmano chutz mekomo. Ho umiratze lepigulo. The only way that something could become right is if somebody who's qualified and he brings it, right, and he establishes the korban now as pigul. So he's a kosher kohen who has the wrong intent. He sprinkles it. Okay, you're right. The korban is pasul still, but that blood now becomes shirayim, and right. That even like you say, well, that shouldn't be shirayim either. It's also a pasul korban. The answer is no. Since that established as pigul, now the blood is shirayim. Now the blood is extra, and that does. Okay. Rav Zvid Masni Yochi. Rav Zvid explained the question that Reish Lakish had as follows. Boy mini Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, Kos pasul mahu. Okay, let's say you have a cup of blood that left the azara. Okay, and the kohen meanwhile sprinkles the rest of the blood onto the mizbeach appropriately. Mahu sheyaseh shirayim. Right? Does this? So what happens is he's got blood from the korban. He takes this, he catches it in multiple utensils, takes a cup of the blood, goes outside of the azara, comes back in, and he sprinkles that on the mizbeach.
It's invalid.
Now that is pasul blood, right? Does that make this shirayim, right? And Now, the big issue about the shirayim is also that once it makes shirayim, you can't go back and redo the korban either. That's also part of this, right? The leftover blood is now extra. It needs to be poured out. So therefore, the blood is done in the case of the mission.
It can't become pigul. So therefore, according to what we put forward, there shouldn't be a problem with this.
So Amar Le, so Rabbi Yochanan answered, Pasol Gufei, right? So if the person himself is a pasol, my sviralach. So then what would you, right? What are you thinking? You don't have a question there, right? Then pasol mishavi shirayim, kos pasol nami mishavi shirayim. Whatever you think the halacha is about a person who is pasol, if he were to throw this blood, right? Throw blood. So then if he makes it into shirayim, so if the cup is also pasol and you throw it, so it also would make shirayim. V'i pasol lo mishavi shirayim, and if a person is pasol doesn't make the blood into shirayim, kos pasol nami lo mishavi shirayim. In other words, it's the equivalent. A person who's pasol and the blood that's pasol is the same thing, right? And since the Mishnah seems to say that if a pasol person throws the blood, it doesn't make it shirayim because you can go back and get more blood.
Right.
So this should theoretically be the same thing, Rabbi Yochanan says.
But he made the korban puzzle. It's different, is it not? The korban became puzzle.
Well, no, this blood became puzzle.
The blood became puzzle.
Because he walked out of the Azara with the blood.
Right.
So only this cup of blood becomes puzzle.
Only the cup of blood becomes
That's
puzzle.
right. Because he ruined this. So therefore, this, says Reish Lakish, says Rabbi Yochanan, is equivalent to this person becoming. You didn't do anything to the animal that's currently has been shechted and is bleeding in the courtyard. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that. You just messed up this blood, just like you messed up this blood when the person who was puzzle caught it. Therefore, go back and get more.
Right.
So that's what he says.
Not, right. It's not. There's no shira.
So it's not a shirayim issue. Okay. Then. Right? Rabbi Yirmiyah Difti Masni Hachi. Rabbi Yirmiyah Difti thought that the question that Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan was as follows. Right? They had all different versions of what Rabbi Yochanan asked, what Reish Lakish asked. Boimine, that Abaye asked Rabba the question, and he said like this: Kos mao shiyas es chavero dochui. Let's say, right, this person takes one cup. He catches the blood in multiple cups. Okay. And then this cup, he walks out of the Mizbeach, out of sight of the Azara, he walks out of the area. Now, all the blood in the other cups that have not walked out, has he ruined that blood as well? Or, is it Dochui? I'm sorry. One sec, what's going there? Abaye Miram.
Shesi says Chavere Dachui Oy Shirai.
Okay, that's what's going on here. Okay,
right.
There's nothing, he didn't walk out. What happens is the person shechts the korban and he catches the blood in two separate cups. Okay, then the Kohen takes one of the cups and he uses that on the Mizbeach to make the korban kosher. The question is, what happens to the rest of the blood in the other cup? Right. Is that blood now extra, unnecessary, just spill it out? Or is that blood the same as the rest of the blood that's in the first cup, and it's shirayim, and you have to spill it out like shirayim, right? Because it's blood from the same korban, right, but it's also blood from a separate utensil. So is it considered shirayim, or is it now unnecessary because the blood has already been brought from this korban, and you may as well spill it out? So Amar Le, so Rabbah says to Abaye, Plugta de Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, V'Rabbanan. That's an argument between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the Rabbanan de Tanya. We learned in a brisa. Lemala, right, in the issue, which is talking about the Nasi, right, who does his Avera, and he brings a korban chatos, which is he brings a seir, we learned in Masech Horios, he brings a goat. Hu Omer, it says the pasuk, Ves damo yishpoch, right, that if he takes from the Kohen takes from the blood with his finger, he puts it on the korban of Mizbeach, and then he pours the rest of the blood into the Yesod. That's what it says. Lemata, then, which talks about the korban chatas of the Yachid, an individual's korban chatas, whoever it says over there, Ves kol dama yishpoch, you should pour all the blood. So now, you are going to learn this. Minayin lechata shekipol dama ba'arba kosos v'nasan matana achas zeh shekula nishbachin liyesod. How do I know that, let's say, the Kohen he starts catching them, he's got small cups. So he takes 4 different cups, and he catches the blood in 4 separate cups, or 4 separate kohanim. Then he goes to the Mizbeach, and he applies to each of the corners of the Mizbeach blood from each of the 4 cups. Okay?
What is before? This is within the courtyard, right?
Nothing left the courtyard, correct. So now he goes and he sprinkles the blood using all 4 cups. So how do I know shekula nishbach l'yisod that the remainder of the blood in each of the cups now gets poured into the base? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "Ves kol dama yishbach." The pasuk says, "You shall pour all of the blood into the base." Yachol nasan arba matonos mikos echad yehu kula nishbach l'yisod. I might think that, let's say, now he applies all the blood from one of the cups, and he's got 3 cups. He didn't do anything. I might think that I should pour all of that blood from all 4 cups down the yisod. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "Ves damo." That's why the pasuk uses singular when it's talking about the nasi. It's blood. Ha-ketzad. So how do I fulfill both? Pouring all the blood and only pouring its blood. Hu nishboch liyasod v'hein nishbochin la'ama. In that circumstance, where he uses only one of the cups, then that blood that was in that cup gets poured into the yasod. The rest gets poured out into the drain. They had a drain, they had a trench of water that would go through the azara, and they would, I guess it was like a squeegee, the blood into that trench, and it would wash out. So you just pour it right into there. You don't need that blood. That blood is not shirayim. Okay? That is the opinion of the Rabbanan. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Minayin lechata shekibel dama ba'arba kosas v'znasan arba matanos mikos echad shekula nishbach liyasod. How do I know that if you caught the blood in 4 separate cups, and then you do all the sprinklings from one of the cups, how do I know pour all 4 cups into the yasod? Talmud Lomar ves kol dama yishpoch. Still, I use the pasuk that says kol dama yishpoch. Okay, now. So there's our argument. Now the question that we're going to need to know is, how do what does Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon use the pasuk that says you only pour its blood in, right? According to the Rabbanan, they use that to tell me that if I used all 4, that I only use one of them, that I don't pour all 4. So the answer is, Amar Ravashi. Ravashi says, Hahu limuti shirayim shebat savar behema. That's to tell me that any blood that's still in the neck of the animal, you don't have to go catch that blood and pour that into the yesod. Only the blood that was caught into the utensils, that's what goes into the yesod. Okay, so that was subject to that discussion, dispute. That also introduces us for the first time to this concept of shirayim, which is going to come up several times upcoming. Now we know what shirayim is, right? The leftover blood after the sprinkling. Right. Next, the Mishnah says, Kibel habasar hakosher v'nosan lapasel. The person who is the kosher takes the blood, catches the blood in the utensil, he hands it to somebody who's puzzle. And then the puzzle person, the Mishnah says he's got to hand it back to the person who is kosher in order to bring it. So then we said another one, if he catches it with his right hand and he brings it to his left hand, he's got to put it back in his right hand. And then the Mishnah said that if he catches the blood in a holy utensil, pours it into a non-holy utensil, he's got to put it back to the holy utensil. What's the point of bringing me all 3 of those cases? I get it. If you do it wrong, then you got to go back and fix it. Okay, what's the point? Utsricha, I need all of those cases. Diashma inon puzzle. If I had learned about the circumstance where the person who was kosher gave it to the person who's puzzle, havamina my puzzle, tame. I might have thought that what kind of puzzle are we talking about? Kohen is tame. And in that circumstance, the chazi lavodas tzibor, since that's not such a bad psul, because there is a circumstance that this Kohen who's tame could do the service. If there were a majority of Kohanim that were not eligible, we could have used him. So aval, small, but the left hand, low, that would never be okay. So therefore a left hand would be worse. V'yashma'in small, and if you told me the left hand can't, I could just bring it back to the right hand. There are services that the left hand is acceptable for. On Yom Kippur, we have to take a scoop of ketores with both hands, and then we have to take it and put it into the ladle, and then we take the coals in the left hand and we take the ladle in the right hand. So you're holding things with the left hand and the right hand. There's sometimes the left hand is useful in service. Therefore, maybe if I put it in the left hand, it doesn't invalidate it. Aval klechol, but a non-sanctified utensil, lo, that would never be okay. Therefore, the pasuk tells me even that's okay. Just put it back. And if you told me even a non-holy service utensil, mishum dechazu lekadushinhu, I would have thought, well, you could, all you got to do is sanctify it. There's nothing wrong with this utensil. I just need to sanctify it. It's a missing part of the process. But the other ones, Emalo, would say, no, they're not okay. So therefore, tzricha, I need all of the cases.
What are they referring to as the other ones?
The other ones, but the person, the Kohen is the puzzle, right, and the left hand.
Oh, other one.
Right? You can't fix your left hand and make it your right hand.
Right.
And somebody who's a puzzle korban, so he's got a Baal Mum, can't become a non-Baal Mum. Right. Okay. So now, v'lahavi le dochui. So why isn't this blood dochui? Right? We learned before that if a korban became invalid for a period of time and then becomes validated again, it's not good. You can't use it anymore. So when it was in the hands of the puzzle, it became dochui, it became unusable. Now you gave it back to the Kohen, it becomes usable again. Who cares? Once it was unusable for a moment, it's not usable ever again. Why shouldn't that be the case? Why is this okay? So the Gemara says, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, Ravina says to Ravashi, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti, Mishmei Derav. This is what Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti said to in the name of Rava. Hamani, whose opinion is this? This is Hanan HaMitzrihu. This is Hanan the Egyptian, his opinion. Deleisle dechuyin. He doesn't hold of this concept of dochui, of something being pushed off. Detanya, as we learned in a brisa, which is brought in Yuma, right? That if let's say korban, you have these two goats on Yom Kippur. They're supposed to be identical. One's supposed to go to Azazel. One's supposed to be for the korban that we've been sprinkling inside the chatos on Yom Kippur, right? So now, let's say, right, he's got the blood, he's shechted, and then the Azazel goat dies. So they say you got to start all over again, right? You got to bring a new. It's nidcha at this point. The blood is you have to bring another seir. But Chanan HaMitzri Omer, why? Because when the seir Mishloach died, the other korban became invalid to be brought. You go get another goat. You can't revalidate it. It's invalid at the moment. But Chanan HaMitzri Omer, afilu dam bakos, even if you've shechted the korban, the blood is in the cup. Maybe chaveru mezavig, just bring another goat, make that one the new Azazel, and you've revalidated the existing korban's blood. You don't have to bring all new. Because he holds, there's no problem. It was dochui for a little bit, it was no good for a little bit, fix it. So this is Chanan HaMitzri's opinion, right? Something that becomes...
You're not fixed. I mean, I hear it. It's not from the same animal. How could it be?
Well, which one you're fixing?
Yeah.
Again, they're the two animals. One's for the Azazel, one's the korban. That's you do the seir, right?
Right.
You shecht the seir for the chatas. You catch the blood,
right.
And then the goat for Azazel drops dead.
Oh, so it's the korban that's being brought to the Oh, that's the one.
Right. Now this blood that's in your cup is invalid because you don't have the other goats.
Right. That's
the answer is bring another goat, and then this one's revalidated. The Chum say no. Now you got to start the whole process all over again. Right. You can't. This blood is now invalidated. You can't revalidate it. Chanan HaMitzri says, sure you can. Okay. Ravashi says, I got a second answer to this problem in the Mishnah. You don't have to say it's Chanan HaMitzri. Kol shebiyado lo havi dichui. Anything that you can fix it is not considered dochui. Meaning, there are things that is against your there's you can't fix this. You can't undead this animal. It died. It's this, but just putting it back into your right hand, you can fix that. So therefore, that's not considered dochui. That's not a problem. Amar Rav Shaya Kavasi Ravashi Mistabra. What Ravashi is saying actually makes some sense because man shamas le deisle dechuyin. Who's the opinion that says that something that is pushed off, you can't fix it again? That's Rabbi Yehuda. That is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It's not as we learn in a Mishnah. The Odom Rabbi Yehuda says, Nishbach Adam Yamus HaMishtaleach. The other way around also is true. If you've caught the blood of the korban, the goat that's inside, and you have the blood, and then you spill it on the floor, now you've ruined it, so you have to go get another Seir Lazazel also, because you've ruined the Seir Lazazel. Okay, so now, Meis HaMishtaleach, but if the goat that is going to be sent away dies, Yishafei Chadam, you've got to spill out the blood. Right? Because now you've ruined the blood that's in the cup because the Azazel died. You've got to start the whole process over. Right. That's his opinion. Visham inon lei, and we see what he holds is Damar kol shebiyado lo havi dochui. He also, Rabbi Yehuda is the one, he still says that if it's in your possibility, if you can fix it, it's not pushed off. Titania, because we're in the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda, the same Rabbi Yehuda holds, he says, Omer, kos echad haya mimale midam hataruvos, that in the Korban Pesach, right, when they were doing the Korban Pesach, so they would have blood on the floor from all the Korbanos. Rabbi Yehuda says, here's what you do. Take a bucket, scoop up the blood, and walk over to the Mizbeach and throw that on the Mizbeach. Why? maybe there was blood that was from one of the korbanos that didn't make it to the Mizbeach. By doing this, you have gotten a mixture of all the blood that's there, scooped it up off the floor, and now you've brought it to Mizbeach. Therefore, any korban that was brought during the day is now fixed. If you never brought it. Okay, well, v'zorkos rikachs, you throw it keneged yesod, opposite the yesod. So now, it's spilled on the floor. It's dachui. At the moment, you can't use it. Right. The answer is no. He holds you can scoop it back up and fix it. So therefore, shma mina, kol shebiyado lo havi dachui shma mina. He says that's not dachui, and it's still the same Rabbi Yehuda, and it's okay. Now, let's talk about Korban Pesach for a second here. This brings up an interesting how the Korban Pesach and this blood throwing work. Gufa, let's go about this issue about what this Bryce was talking about. Tanya in a Brysa. Rabbi Yehuda said, Kos echad haya memali midama torah. They would take one cup and they'd have all this blood mixed on the floor after doing thousands and thousands of Korban Pesachs. They'd have all this blood on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. He would fill up a cup from the mixture of all the blood, she'im yishafech echad mehem, so that if one of the Korban Pesachs that were brought had spilled out without being sprinkled on the Mizbeach, nimtza shehu machshiro, this would fix it. So everybody's Korban Pesach, everybody goes home with a kosher Korban Pesach. That fixes everything. Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda, the Chacham said to Rabbi Yehuda, v'halo lo niskabel b'kli. How's that going to fix it? If the animal was shechted and the blood spilled on the floor, you can't do that, right? Remember, it has to be caught in a utensil. So the answer is mino yadi. Well, how do they know it wasn't caught in a utensil? You don't know what happened to this blood. Maybe it was caught in a utensil and they dropped it. So the answer is no. Ella shema lo niskabel b'kli. What they meant to ask him was, how's that going to fix it? Maybe it didn't get caught in utensil. That's still not going to fix it. So Amar lehen, to which Rabbi Yehuda says, Af ani lo amarti ela kish niskabel b'kli. You're right. I'm only suggesting it helps when it was caught in a utensil. You're right. It's not going to help where it can't help, but it will help where it could help. Vehu gufe mino yada. So how does Rabbi Yehuda know that the blood is caught in the utensil? He doesn't know that it was caught. So the answer is Kohanim's reason va'avdin chaya umishtabchin, because the Kohanim are careful. The Kohanim wouldn't let the shechten animal walk away. They would have caught it. However, Kohanim were also running fast. They drop things. So it's more likely possible that the Kohen caught it, did it right, and then dropped it. More than it's likely that the Kohanim just messed it up and let the blood spurt without catching it. Valo dam tamsis mu'urav bo. 1 second, Rabbi Yehuda. How are you doing this? There's blood on the floor. This blood is a mixture of the blood that is kosher, the dam ha-nefesh, which we said was the blood that spurts out, and then the rest of the blood that comes out of the animal afterwards. This is a mixture, and part of the blood is no good. Isn't it batal? Right? So Rabbi Yehuda l'tameh, it's Rabbi Yehuda, according to his own reason, to Amar, dam ha-tamsis kare dam, he holds dam tamsis is still considered blood. According to him, that's not possible. You can use dam tamsis to throw on the Mizbeach. Detanyas, we learn in a Brisa, dama tamtis bazhara, that somebody who has blood that's dama tamtis and he eats dama tamtis. So is that blood? So Rabbi Yehuda Omer bit kares. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's kares, just like dam ha-nefesh. The Chachamim say no, it's only a los haseh. If you eat dam ha-nefesh, then it's kares. If you eat dam tamtis, you eat just blood from an animal, that is los haseh, right? Says Rabbi Yehuda, no, there's no difference. All blood is blood, and therefore it would seem to be of our position. We're presuming Rabbi Yehuda would also say dam tamsis can be used as blood to sprinkle for a korban. V'amar Rabbi Elazar, but didn't Rabbi Elazar say that Rabbi Yehuda's mode to Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda would agree le'inyan kapara, as far as a korban goes, she'eno mechaper, that the dam tamsis doesn't help. Okay, fine. He calls it kares blood. It's good. You're going to get kares free, but he doesn't say that it's blood that helps you work for a korban. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ki adam hu nefesh banefesh yechaper, because there's a special pasuk that says the blood of the nefesh, that's what gives you atonement, not dam tamsis. Dam shanefesh yotzei bo korei dam, sheina nefesh yotzei bo eino korei dam. It's not blood, so you're still back to the same problem. If he's scooping up blood from the floor, he's got a mixture of dam tamsis and dam nefesh. It's not going to help. How's he fixing any korbanos? El Rabbi Yehuda l'tameh. So we're going to say no. Rabbi Yehuda, according to his other reasoning, that he says damar ein dam mevatel dam. He says min b'mino is not mevatel. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Therefore, blood is not going to invalidate blood. When you've got a mixture of bloods, the dam that's still there, that is dam nefesh, is still going to be active. So that's why it doesn't matter. Okay, Amar lehem Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says lidivrechem. Right, according to you, you don't throw the blood. So lama poki azara. So then why did they have the practice where they would plug up the drain in the azara? We said there was a stream that would go through and the water would carry through. So the blood should have all gone into the stream and ran out of the Beis Hamikdash. How did they have all this blood? A whole. They had blood that went up to the knees of the Kohanim in there. How did they get a bathtub full of blood in the Azara? How did that work? So the answer is what they plugged it up. They plugged up the drain. Why did they do that? Right. According to me, they were trying to catch all the blood so that at the end we could fix it. Right. According to you, why did they do that? So now they said to him, Shevachu livnei Aaron she'achu arkuvusehem badam. The answer is it was a glory to the Kohanim to walk in blood up to their knees. That was beautiful. Let's see how many korbanos we brought today. It was like, that's like, how much is
swimming?
That's right. Rivers of mitzvahs.
Good luck washing it off after that.
Oh, okay. Now. The hod dam havi chatzitza, but we've got other problems now. There's blood on the floor. You can't, it's a chatzitza, you have to stop, you have to do the avodah while you're standing on the floor. So lahu, it's liquid. Right? Velo havi chatzitza. It's liquid, it's not a chatzitza. Right? Titania's learned in Brisa, hadam v'hadio v'advash v'achalav. If you've got on your body blood, ink, honey or milk, yevation if they're dry, chotzin it's a chatzitza. But lachin if they're liquidy, ain't chotzin. That's not a chatzitza. Liquid is mixed with liquid. It's going to not be a chatzitza. Okay, so now vaha kamitavsi manaihu. Well, 1 second. Then their robe is going to become bloody. And it'll be stained. Vitanya, we learned in a brisa before. Hayubegadav metush toshin. If you've got dirty garments. Valvad avoda so, and then you do the service with stained garments. Psula, your avoda is no good. So how are the Kohanim doing the avoda with stained garments? And if you're going to say, well, they pulled the garments up high, we already learned you can't do that either, right? Vatanya, we're in a brisa, mido, kemida, so they have to fit properly. Shalo yechaser v'lo yoser, you can't be short or long. Tosos points out, remember, we had two opinions on that, right? You could have shortened it with the belt, right? So according to the opinion that says you could have shortened it with the belt, it wouldn't be a problem, right? But according to the opinion that says once you shorten it with the belt, it's really shortened, it's not a problem, it's really a problem. Okay, so the answer is, beholachas evorim lakeves. What they did is they plucked, this was only done, they had the blood that was stored up, only when they were carrying the limbs to the ramp of the Mizbeach. Delav avodahi, that's not really a service that required.
I know he said halacha was one of the 4 services.
Velo, but what do you mean it's not a service? V'atanya, we're in a brisa. V'kriva kohen esakol, everything has to be brought. Zu halachas evorim lakeves, including the bringing of the limbs to the ramp. Ella, halachas eitzim lamaracha, this was done when they brought the wood to the mizbeach, to lav avodah. That's not a service, right? Okay, that's fine. V'avoda heichi yazli. Okay, so if that's the case, how were they doing the service up until this point, right? Fine, they're shechting, they were doing thousands of korbanos, and all of a sudden now they walk up to their knees, they got their robes stained or they hiked them up, right? How are they doing the service, right? So the answer is, Azli a'itztabei, they would go onto these raised stone platforms that they had in the Mizbeah, in the Azhara. I don't know exactly how this would work. Right. In the Azhara, that they would walk on these stones, like walking onto these stones, so that, and those stones were considered part of the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. And they were elevated. That's right, but they had to be part of the floor, and they're elevated, so they had these elevated stones that they were walking on. Interesting.
Wow.
Okay, so it's a good place to stop because I want to start a new Mishnah.
Perfect.
Right here.
Perfect. Go ahead.
That was amazing. I was chazoring, like all this about the pigel.